So welcome to the Consultation. My name is Josh Floyd. This is Christina Jimenez, and here we have with us the lovely Donna Bloom.
Yay!
She's joining us again for some more fun, exciting conversation.
About domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking.
Oh, yeah.
So that
Yes,
sounds like a lot of
yes.
fun, everybody.
Oh.
We'll make it as fun as we can.
Well, thank you so much for joining us again, Donna. I love when
Absolutely.
you're on.
Oh,
I love
thank
it,
you.
love it, love it.
I'm
love it
always
because
excited.
Our video got the most likes last time.
Exactly.
Nobody-
Yeah, it's great for
I
viewership,
got a lot of
so we
likes.
love
I was telling my niece this morning on my way over. I was like, man, I feel like last time I went, they kind of got me with a gotcha question at the very beginning. If they do that to me again, I don't know what I'm gonna do. So you don't have any of those today, do you?
Actually, you were telling us about the judicial conference. Thing.
Oh, yeah.
So
Man,
I want you to tell us all about
I
that.
have had I have been doing a lot of training lately, and exhausting, but I was invited, a major honor, to present at the Texas Center for the Judiciary's annual conference down in San Antonio. And there were, I think that there were like 600 or 700 judges in attendance, but this year is the first year that all judges every year have to get 1 hour of required training around family violence, sexual assault, stalking, these issues. And so they had their conference that first week of September, and I'm doing an hour, but they made it the last hour of the entire conference.
That's always the best way.
And also, I'm fairly certain that there's a tad bit of resentment about the requirement to get the training,
Right.
especially all judges. So in the audience, you have probate judges, you have judges that are civil, judges that don't hear family law or CPS or criminal, and so they're all probably wondering, why do I need to get this training? But I think our position is that it really doesn't matter what you do as a judge. Like, these are sort of fundamental issues that all people face. And so having some basic knowledge and understanding is super important. So
before you dive into like what you spoke about, I wanted, because I know we did this last year, but I think it's so important for people to know like your history and like all of your experience and probably why you were selected to give this speech in the first place.
For sure,
So
for sure.
Why don't you tell us about that?
Right. Okay. So I am the Director of Legal Services at Friends of the Family, which means I'm an attorney. I manage some attorneys there and a legal staff, and also victim advocates that work with victims at the agency. I've been doing that. This is my 18th year at Friends of the Family. That's a long time. And prior to that, I worked in Austin just after law school at St. Mary's. Shout out St. Mary's University School of Law. So I worked for a group in Austin called the Texas Advocacy Project, and they're a statewide victims' rights civil litigation organization. So, and then prior to law school, I went to law school late. So I went to law school when I was 33. And before law school and after undergrad, I worked in the family violence movement. So I worked with quite a few domestic violence agencies in Dallas. And then eventually, when I was 29, I moved out to Longview, Texas, and ran the Domestic Violence and Rape Crisis Center out there for about 3 years before I went to law school. So I think one of the reasons why I get asked to do training is it's not just the lawyer piece of it. It's like having that wide perspective of all of these sort of various roles within the organizations that I've worked for. So I understand. I've worked a hotline. I've done victim advocacy. I did a lot of like community engagement for years. I did just training with hospital staff or cops, or I did a ton of teenage dating violence. I go to high schools and talk to kids about teen dating violence. So
very cool.
Yeah. So now I just combine the law practice with the training issue.
Awesome.
Yeah. So I've been doing a lot of that.
What did you talk about at the conference? What did you teach all of these judges?
It was really quite stressful. I'm usually not super stressed about training. Most of these topics are kind of second nature to me, but I had some sleepless nights over this one because first of all, it's judges.
Right.
Also, it's all the Denton County judges.
Right.
So all my judges.
Right.
So also I can't tell any of my stories
right.
where I'm like,
the judge.
exactly, because they're all out there. So I wanted to make it I didn't want it to be boring. I didn't want it to be too basic, but I wanted it to be basic enough. So I ended up going with basically the concept was I talked about 3 different homicide victims or cases that I have personal intersection with, and kind of what those cases had in common and why they weren't obvious risks for homicide based on our understanding. So if we're looking at like incident-based analysis, right? Like, were the police involved? Was he arrested for strangling her? You know, that's what that's usually we're looking at, like, what was the criminal justice history? How many times had the police been out? And in a lot of homicides in Texas, there's very little intersection with the criminal justice system. And also, so basically what I talked about is what were the things in these cases that should have given us indications that there was lethality beyond our incident-based kind of statutory understanding of domestic violence. Right. So I talked about, you know, the lethality. There's a danger assessment that was created by a woman named Dr. Jackie Campbell. She's a nurse and started looking at domestic violence in the healthcare field and basically reviewed just thousands of cases and found all of these like intersections and things that the cases had in common. And eventually she created this like 21 question danger assessment. That we all use. So a lot of our law enforcement use a smaller version of it. You guys may have seen it. I mean, y'all have done some criminal law practice, probably done some family violence. You might see that lethality assessment, that danger assessment.
So is that the report where they like have weapons been used in the past?
That's exactly right. Like you're asking, and theirs is usually like 9 or 10 questions. Right. The more formal one that Dr. Campbell created is like 21 questions, but most of them are not like about physical violence. It's all these other indicators.
Like what?
So like some of the ones on her lethality indicator or her danger assessment are things like, you know, has he threatened to kill you, right? Which we often minimize, and victims will often minimize, right? Like they don't really, you know, someone says they're going to kill you, they don't necessarily internalize it or believe that that's ever going to happen. Right. So asking that question is really important. Have those words ever come out of this person's mouth to you? Do they have access to firearms? Is a big one. So over 50% of the people killed in the state of Texas in 2023 in intimate partner homicides were firearms. So it's a massive indicator, the connection of I want to kill you, and I have a gun to do it.
Right.
Suicidal ideation, big one. And I was teaching the judges that a lot of times when I'm litigating a protective order, and I want to get into the fact that he's threatened to kill himself, I'll get a relevancy objection, right? And you know, you know, the other side might say, Judge, we're here to talk about family violence. Like whether or not he's suicidal or not doesn't. And so I have to sort of argue around, well, you know, it's an indication of he's homicidal. In my work, if you're suicidal and you're abusive, you're also potentially homicidal.
Right.
But for a lot of judges, they might sustain that objection.
Right. They don't get the link.
Yeah, they don't get the link. So really talking about what these indicators are, unemployment. So consistent unemployment or like long-term unemployment or like in and out of jobs.
I did not know
is
that.
On the lethality indicator. And again, no one thing is the thing, right? It's this puzzle. And it's like identifying all of the pieces. So the lethality indicator is scored. And so you can get an idea based on the answers to these questions whether or not someone elevates as far as lethality goes. So that another one that's kind of interesting is there are children in your home that are not his biological children. That was another one that people don't really think about. Sexual violence. We don't talk a lot about sexual violence. It is unfortunately really pervasive in abusive situations. But it's one of those topics that's taboo.
Well, and I've had that happen in a lot of our cases where the clients will say, well, he's never hit me, he's never punched me, he's never nothing, but in the bedroom.
Yes.
There have been several times where he made me do things I didn't want to do.
That's right.
And so he's never assaulted me. I'm like, no, that's assault. They won't make that connection.
That's right.
Yeah.
And that's the thing is like, one of the cases I talked about was the case of a young woman that was murdered in Denton back in 2014.
Mm-hmm.
And I have permission to talk about her case because I actually represented her sister in getting her kiddo back from Mexico. I don't know if we've talked about that before, but it was like,
I think so.
He murdered. He took the child to Mexico, and we worked with the Denton County DA's office and local law enforcement, also the FBI and the State Department. We did a Hague. We did the whole
all of that.
Yeah, all of that, and then Interpol in Mexico. I think they were in Mexico City. Needle in a haystack. Right. So in 2016, we were able to recover the child.
Oh, wow.
And he was extradited and tried, and he's doing 40 years. So
nice.
It was like a sort of pivotal kind of fundamental moment in my practice.
Right.
Like that was a big case. But in her case, she had been coming to Friends of the Family, and she had actually been in my legal clinic. But, the questions that we were asking at the time, we were not really focusing. We were also fairly incident-based and focusing on this physical violence issue and not really cueing in on sexual violence and the spectrum of sexual violence, that not just about like actual sexual assault, but sexual coercion, sexual harassment, and forms of sexual assault, maybe like not actual, sexual assault penetration, but like indecent assault kinds of things now that you'll see in the law. So we weren't asking good questions about that, and we were not asking questions about stalking. We weren't really focused on stalking. We didn't have a lot of education about it. And so this young woman was in my legal clinic, and she had pro se filed her own custody suit, SAPSR. And in my legal clinic, I asked her a few questions. It seemed like, this was not it wasn't a high danger situation.
So no previous arrests, incidents of family violence,
exactly.
no CPS investigations.
Yeah, exactly. None of those kinds of things. Right. And nothing that she was articulating. No, she wasn't necessarily articulating any fear. But again, like if someone doesn't understand that sexual coercion and sexual violence and being grabbed and things like that are abuse.
So let's stop really quickly and just explain like sexual coercion, because some people may not know what that.
So
thank you.
That's good. So like sexual violence, that's okay. Like we kind of talk about sexual violence on a continuum, just like any other form of violence, right? So we could do it like we do in our work called an escalation ladder, where you talk about what are the sort of lower forms of maybe say physical abuse, and how does that escalate, and what's at the top of the escalation ladder. So for physical violence, the top of the escalation ladder is homicide, right? And the bottom of the escalation ladder might be using your body to physically impose yourself to prevent somebody from having freedom to leave a space, or so as it it can escalate up. So sexual coercion can be similar, where you're talking about it's starting with just inappropriate conversation, inappropriate things that you're talking about, maybe when you're in a public setting with other people, the way that you might physically dominate someone in a sexual way, grabbing them, touching them without consent.
You can't go visit your mom and dad this weekend unless you send me certain pictures.
Absolutely.
Or you just perform this sexual act.
Yes.
And then you can go.
Yes. So that's a lot. That's a big part of it is so for a lot of our clients, their participation in actual having sex with their partner is connected to something like that, or they're trying to avoid the consequences of saying no, right? So exactly. So, I have a client that, her abuser, they were married, and, he would tell her that, she's his wife and it's her duty to have sex. She would say no. He would have sex with her. And then she and I would ask her, like, did you tell me a little bit about what was like for you? Was it forcible? Was it, did he physically assault you? And oftentimes that's not the case, right? Oftentimes it's like, no, I told him no. I ended up kind of going along with it, because if I didn't, like, he's going to keep me up all night. Mm-hmm. He's going to talk to me. Mm-hmm. He's not going to let me sleep. I have to get to work in the morning, mm-hmm. right? And so there's all these consequences, and that's really what I mean by sexual coercion. Right? Is like it may look on its face that it's consensual. Right. To just like the common eye that where you're not asking these questions, but when you start to dig in and say, is that something you wanted to do? Right. Were you also enjoying that? Right. Was that something you chose? And once you start to learn that it's like, no, I don't, that's not something I enjoy, but if I don't do that, you know, then there's a consequence for me. You know, and that consequence can be anything that's on the spectrum of abuse. It could be financial, it could be emotional abuse, but it could also be physical violence. Mm-hmm. You know, there could be, you know, physically violent consequences mm-hmm. for not participating. So, you know, we weren't asking those questions. And what I learned after this young woman's death, when I started to represent her sister, to get the kiddo back, was there were lots of things that would have been red flags to us had we been really identifying.
Like they would have been red flags.
Yeah, had we been, had she been in my legal clinic, and instead of accepting, she doesn't feel fearful of him, and there's, you know, she feels confident and comfortable with moving forward pro se on her case, mm-hmm. And ask some more probing questions mm-hmm. around, you know, why are you even at the agency? Right? Like, what drew you to Friends of the Family? You know, mm-hmm. we're a domestic violence and sexual assault agency. Like, she was receiving some counseling from us. So what made you think that we were the right place for you? What was going on in your relationship that led you to be here? Mm-hmm. And how is that going now? Which would have led us to this conversation that I was having with the judges, which is about post-separation power and control. Okay. Because we talk a lot about power and control. That's kind of the basic. Have you ever seen that power and control wheel? Mm-hmm. Google it. There's tons of them. But the power and control wheel kind of forms the basis for how we talk about violence in a relationship. It's like the center is power and control, and all the spokes are the various ways that someone will gain that power and control. Mm-hmm. And then the physical and sexual violence kind of holds it all together. Okay.
So let me take you back real quick to the sexual stuff, because it's a problem that, and maybe it's just because I'm a male, right? Mm-hmm. And they're female clients, right? Mm-hmm. Getting them to open up about the gruesome details, right? And how to know when to dive into the details, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, if they say, hey, I was raped, he forced it on me, right? Absolutely. Yes. Tell me what happened that evening. Yes. Right? But if they don't come in and say, hey, he forced me to have sex with him, I'm not going to feel comfortable. They probably wouldn't feel comfortable if I was going into, well, tell me about your day-to-day sex life, right?
Right. So that is I think that's a uniquely difficult for people, whether they're men or women. I think it's an additional layer of complexity when it's a male attorney that's trying to have this conversation. What I would say is that I think all attorneys should be using a really good screening tool in their practice. Like, I think every time someone walks into your practice, they're filling out all your intake paperwork or your initial stuff, they should be doing basically domestic violence sexual assault screening tool. And maybe they say, no, this is not what's going on with me. Mm-hmm. But really what happens is these are the ways that people start to identify this is an issue. Mm-hmm. Because for many folks, they're not going to come in and say, you know, yes, I'm experiencing. In many cases, they're not going to come in and even tell you about the physical violence. Right. I mean,
I've had it happen where they're just ashamed. Like, I had this one lady, and I mean, she and her husband are very well off. She's a beautiful lady. Like, you look at them, they're this picture perfect family. And it wasn't until I was working with her probably like 2 or 3 months that I was just like, there's something you're not telling me. Like, I feel like it. Yeah. And I was like, just talk to me. And she just like broke down crying, and she's just like, I don't want this to come out. I don't want anybody to know, but this is what I'm experiencing. And I'm like, this is dangerous. Yes. This isn't good. Yeah. So, but I think the shame comes into it a lot.
So when you have like a standardized screening tool, it sort of removes the shame, right? Because it's like, we ask everybody. Mm-hmm. And we ask everybody because whether or not this will ever come up in your litigation, we need to know. Because my point to attorneys, or I trained mediators yesterday, is it's important to have this information, not because you're going to put it in your pleadings or you're ever going to go have a hearing, but it informs your creativity around problem solving in the case.
Right.
I can't tell you the number of victims I've met with that have, reached agreements in their divorce or custody case, gotten an order, and it's just not a safe, workable order. And it's not because their lawyer did a bad job. It's because their lawyer didn't know.
Right.
And so the exchanges are happening at her home, and he's sexually assaulting her at her home during the exchanges. Exchanges are some of the most dangerous times for victims after they leave on that post-separation power and control wheel. So, if and your client doesn't want you to bring it up, which is, that's frustrating, right? Because you, as a lawyer, you're like, we need to help. We need to tell. But, there are a lot of victims that are going to say, I don't want to escalate him. I don't want to make him angry. I just want to be out.
Right.
I don't think he's a danger to his kids, which, again, as attorneys, we need this information so we can educate our clients about whether or not he is a safety threat to his children.
Right.
One of the major conversations I have with clients like this is they'll say, he hurts me, he's never hurt the kids, he would never hurt the kids, he's not a danger to the children. And I'm like, well, he may not be physically harming your children, but have your children been around, or are they aware of this abuse that you've experienced? And very often, whether they're physically seeing it or not, they're aware of it, they know about it. And I said, how are you going to feel when you're out of this relationship and your ex gets into a new relationship?
Right.
And he's doing the same thing to his current partner that he was doing to you, and you're not there to protect your kids.
Right.
And so I don't want you to regret not bringing these issues to the court's attention to get some protection for your children, because you didn't consider that he's going to continue this behavior.
Right.
And part of that's educating people that it is a pattern for the person that's using violence. A lot of victims think it's about them, right? It's like, well, it must be something I'm doing. I'm triggering it. It's my behavior. And they don't totally understand that many people that use violence in their relationships, there's a history of it in previous relationships, and it will continue in future relationships if there's not some kind of accountability and containment.
Well, and it's also an opportunity to get the abuser some help.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yes.
As if you bring it to the court's attention, we can get them into counseling, we can get them...
Well, a battering intervention program, right? Which is what, Friends of the Family has, but it is the main sort of modality of treatment, I guess is the best way to say that, for people that use violence, because, a lot of folks, again, if they're just talking about incident-based violence, right? It's easy for us to go, oh, this person has an anger management problem, right? He needs or she needs to learn how to control their anger. But if you step back and really talk about intimate partner violence for what it is, which is contextualizing the entire experience, right? Not just that incident, but what is their financial control? What's the emotional abuse? Is there forms of coercive control? And what I mean by that is monitoring behaviors. How many have you seen lately? How many people have cameras in their homes to monitor their partner?
In bedrooms.
Yes. The technology today available for legitimate reasons that are getting exploited to track and monitor victims of violence in relationships is astounding.
Right.
And so if you don't step back and talk about all of these other behaviors, it's easy to act like it's an anger management problem. But almost always it's not, because what we know about someone that uses violence in a relationship is they're actually really good at controlling their anger. They go to a job every day, they have a boss they hate, but they don't strangle him. They go to church and might get upset about, some church decision that's being made, but they're not assaulting people at their church. They operate in the world quite well, which should tell us this is not an anger management problem. This is a power and control problem.
Right.
Which is why that battering intervention program is so important, because that's what it's going to focus on.
Right.
So from an evidentiary perspective, right, because where we run into problems is it's obviously easy to prove incident-based violence, right? I mean, we have police reports, we have pictures, whatever. But the coercion, right, or the my kids have been impacted. And the obvious question is, well, did they see it? No, if they didn't see it, then how you never impacted? Well, you don't. You're speculating, right? And so how do you get around that to get it before the judge?
Yeah, I love that. So, we've started using some of our folks at the agency as experts. We also have used some evidence-based tools, and I don't mean like evidence-based like our evidence, like entry of evidence, but evidence-based in terms of their effectiveness, right? Like they're studied, and like that lethality tool is like been studied and proven to have efficacy. So we use the danger assessment tool. We have a coercive control checklist that we might enter, right, and ask our questions. Hey, when you came to Friends of the Family, you actually completed a coercive control checklist, and we try to get that in and go over it, right? Educating the judge about all of these things that should be considered as a part of the entire relationship, the nature of the relationship. And then the greatest one I think that's been really useful to us is a stalking assessment tool. It's called Spark, and it's a nationally used tool that actually is online, and anybody could use it. Like if you had a paralegal that got kind of trained in how to do it, they could sit down with the victim and go through, and it asks the victim a set of questions, and it actually produces a narrative assessment.
Oh, wow.
It's very cool.
Wow,
right?
Yeah.
And so it'll say like, John Doe is doing X, Y, and Z this many times. So it measures like severity and frequency. It then kind of combines it and reports it. It creates a safety plan. It creates like a risk assessment. It's very cool. And what we've done is utilize some of our folks that know how to, help a client through that tool and understand it, come in and testify to it as an expert. This is what I've been doing. I'm an advocate. I work with victims. I have done, I'm trained in stalking. And then we enter the tool.
Wow.
To talk about like, hey, this is an evidence-based tool that she provided this information. So, hey, judge, like, she is definitely being stalked. And that's kind of the other area. So we talk about coercive control and the lethality assessment, but it's stalking that has been, I think, the most like profound shift in my practice. It's really easy when people separate from abusive partners for their behavior to not look like stalking, or for us to minimize it, because we're like, oh, he just wants to see his kids. That's why he's sitting out at her place all day. Or he just wants to talk to her about their money situation. That's why he's showing it at her job every day. And he's just leaving her flowers on her car. I mean, it's because he loves her, right? And we don't understand, because of the nature of their relationship and because they share children together, we misidentify the tactics of stalking. And that's what happened in the young woman's case in 2014. He was stalking her. She had gone to the police that week prior to her death, reporting that she believed he had cut her brakes. Now, how do you prove that?
Right.
And, the police department was like,
So
also,
let me back up. So this guy had no criminal history?
No
nothing.
Criminal history.
No, like, prior violent acts? Like, no, there was nothing. And so she thought that he was stalking her. Yeah,
and I think they had a previous history of physical violence in their relationship, but never reported to the police. Okay. And I only learned about this, one, in her custody suit. She had filed on pro se, and again, I hadn't reviewed any of these. So she's in my legal clinic. She's got a pro se SAPSR, and her problem that she's reporting is, I can't get it set for a hearing. The court coordinator won't set it without him agreeing to a hearing setting. And so it was forcing her into this communication with him. And so I was like, oh, okay, we referred her out to an organization that does like pro se assistance that helped her file a motion to set a final hearing. And that's what escalated him. So I hadn't gone back and reviewed any of the pleadings, but she had over time, because the SAPSR had been pending for like 1.5 years, she couldn't get it off the ground. And she had filed multiple affidavits. Like I'm afraid he's going to take my son to Mexico. I'm really scared. I'm scared of him. But I hadn't seen those. And
but to be fair, though, and I mean, even sometimes today, these statements of "I'm scared," "I'm fearful," a lot of times in courts are not enough to hold up. Right?
That's right. And she but she never got heard, right? Because she's pro se and filing affidavits.
Right.
Nobody's reading them.
Right.
There's no motion to go with them. There's no, they're getting filed. They're in the court's record, but nobody's looking at them.
Right.
And so by the time she got to our clinic, I think she was, she's a young woman, very smart. She was in college. She's this beautiful young woman, really had it together. Seemed like she could do it. He wasn't a problem. Get her connected to this assisted pro se program, and she's going to have the smarts to get in front of a judge. She didn't want to limit his access. She wanted, she just wanted him to stop showing up at her job whenever he wanted and demanding the child at his convenience. She wanted, show up at this time, pick up your kid, return your kid at this time. Her desire wasn't to keep him from the child, but for him, her trying to proceed in getting a court order was going to establish that he pay her money. And for him, he thought, well, she's trying to take my child from me. So once she filed that motion to get that final hearing set, I think he started to plan leaving with the kiddo, and which led to her death. I mean, he strangled and bludgeoned her basically at her work on McKinney, right across the street from the courthouse. She had a job at a little insurance agency, and she was the only one in the office, and the child was there as well.
Oh my gosh!
And we think that the child didn't witness it. We think she had like a little play area set up for him and little like earphone. We think he probably didn't witness what happened to his mom, but. That was one of the cases. The other case was my grandmother, and I probably shared before that my grandmother was a homicide victim. My grandfather murdered my grandmother, and her case is also a case where I didn't know a lot about it, but we went back to Lubbock, which is where she was murdered, and I found several really excellent news articles from 1953 that clearly identify, like, my grandmother had left him. She'd gotten her own divorce. She pro se, got child support established, was living with her 6 children, and he was stalking her. I mean, the news article said neighbors reported that he was in the area, that he would be there just sitting in a car, and he came and he shot her one day, and so, and no criminal history, and different then, right? Like, there weren't really laws that she could report him being violent, but he had a history of physical violence that I was able to learn from my mom, when I became an adult. And so all of these, and then of course the third one was the Painter children. And I don't know if y'all remember that case, but it was in 2018 in Ponder, and a father was recently divorced from the mother of these 3 children, and he brought the children to her home, and he murdered all 3 of the children. Oh my gosh. Killed her boyfriend, and then shot himself, left her alive.
Oh my gosh.
And so we only came to know her after the offense occurred, but I got to know her, and I got to talk to her. No criminal history. He wasn't a physically violent. He wasn't someone that was physically abusing her, but there was a lot of elements of coercive control. She had finally gotten away. There was a lot of suicidal threats and suicidal ideation. There was a firearm that she tried to keep and eventually had to return it to his parents, begging them, not to give it to him. And I think either they did or he got access to it, and that was indeed the firearm that he used to commit this crime. So I think my point to the judges was, it's not all going to be in a black eye, a broken arm, or a trip to the hospital. You have to have the full story. Right. And the full story includes evidence of stalking, danger assessments with these evidence-based questions, and then this coercive control.
I'm so thankful that you took the time to share that with judges, because we've learned it, and probably mostly from visiting with you, but a lot of times when we go into court, at least for me personally, and I tell the judges these types of stories or these incidents, I sometimes feel like they're not taken seriously. Yeah. And I think it's because they haven't been educated the way,
Yeah, I think it's super hard. I mean, I am sympathetic to judges because they don't often get all the information. Someone's lucky if they have you or Josh as their attorney, and you guys are asking these questions and you're going to try to tease it out in front of a judge. But a lot of attorneys don't. They're not screening, they're not talking to their clients, or they don't know how to connect the dots. They don't understand how all these pieces come together, and they minimize what the client is communicating to them.
Right. And so if we have these concerns that perhaps somebody is being stalked and that it could escalate to something way more serious, what would you recommend that someone do?
Well, I mean, obviously, if they're here in Denton County or in a jurisdiction where there's an organization like Friends of the Family, I honestly think that's the very best place to start is, connecting your client with a subject matter expert, right? Who is trained to identify what these issues are. And then as an attorney, be willing to have some communication and collaboration with that organization. Right. We work really hard. Here's a plug, any Denton County attorneys watching, to try to find attorneys that will work at a reduced rate, right? For our clients, we'll take a reduced retainer because it is wild right now how much it costs to hire a lawyer. Yeah. It's wild. And a lot of middle class people, or for sure low income people, they can't marshal the money it takes to retain somebody. Right. And truly retaining an attorney is a pathway to freedom and safety. Right. Right? Sometimes that's the only way you're going to get it. And if the only way you can get that is to have the money to get access to it, it kind of sucks because that means your freedom and your safety is entirely connected to your financial ability to seek it.
Which the other party controls generally.
Exactly. Right. So, I've, had clients that, run and leave and go hide out. And, if the, abusive partner has control and access to finances and the ability to do so, I mean, they're going to hire an attorney, and what are they going to do? They're going to go file a TRO. Right. And in their TRO, they're going to say,
she absconded with the children,
and she's crazy. Right. She has mental health issues, or all the things. She's gonna run out of state, or and listen, sometimes those things could well be true, right? She might be running to another state, and I try to explain to victims that want to leave, here's how this stuff works, and here's how child jurisdiction works, right? And if you go, don't hide, right? Because you're going to end up, he's going to get a TRO, he's going to serve you alternatively at some point, he's going to go get an order before you ever know any of this stuff happened, and now you're digging yourself out of a hole, and so having access to good legal safety planning and thoughtfulness about how you get out, right? And that's I think one of the important things. Here's a good message for people watching this. You don't have to have left a relationship to reach out to an organization like mine. I would much rather someone reach out to us before they leave so that we can help them leave well. Because you want to leave well if you can. Not everybody can, but if you can, you want to leave well. Right. And leaving well means having your documents, doing some safety planning, knowing where you're going to go, knowing if you have access to financial resources. It could be having that conversation with that family member who has a credit card, or willing to lend you some money to retain an attorney. Doing some of that planning before you leave can be really critical in making sure that you're not in a position where your child's now with this person that was abusive to you, and you've got supervised visits because you absconded with the child, right? And it's hard to tell the story to the court about why, especially when he's not been arrested and the evidence isn't overwhelming. You don't have photographs of injuries and police arrest. If you have sexual violence or things that were scaring her, but it's hard to really convey that fear in a way that the court understands, then your client can really end up in a really bad position. Right. So
that's what I was thinking about that first homicide you're talking about, the 2014 one or whatever.
Yes.
Had she had an attorney, it's a different story, right?
I think about that, and I talked about this in the mediation training I did yesterday. It's I never think I've been to probably 13 or 14 funerals now in this work, because the truth is that women die. But I never sort of feel systems are responsible. If the police had done a better job, it's their fault, or it's our fault if we had done a better job. But I do think that we should be able to be critical of ourselves in a constructive way to say, yeah, we could have done some things differently, and it's possible that had we done some things differently, there could have been a different outcome.
That's what I'm saying. She's filing his affidavits.
Yes.
I mean, maybe nobody's reading them.
Yeah.
Right, but maybe somebody should have, right? Maybe it should have been flagged. Maybe a coordinator should have called her in and judge said, here's some resources.
Right.
Right?
Something. And I mostly think about it in terms of, man, if she'd been in my legal clinic, and at the time I was the only attorney at Friends of the Family. So, I mean, I can handle these kinds of cases. Like they're, they take a lot of work.
Right.
And so I can handle maybe 25, 30 cases. And so, we have hundreds of people that need attorneys. So I have to be selected based on lethality and, all those things. I often think, man, if I had been in the position to be able to just say, I'll handle it. You need a lawyer. I might have been able to make sure that the father of this child understood that she wasn't trying to keep the child from him. Right. That they could coexist. That he could have access to his child. That we could work out a schedule that was meaningful for him, that we could work out a child support number that he felt he could manage, right? That it didn't have to feel so hopeless for him.
Right.
But, and that's, I'm guessing, because these guys are, if you're willing to take the steps and actions that he took, it's very possible that it wouldn't have mattered. Right? Because at the end of the day, the reason why many women die during litigation, which they do, a lot of family violence homicides happen during litigation. Many of them in Denton County. There's been a divorce. There was a murder 2-3 weeks ago in Double Oak, and she had just filed for divorce. And if you think about it, it makes sense, right? Like, I'm leaving an abusive situation. What's the next step?
Right.
I'm going to file for divorce, or I'm going to file custody, or I need financial help. So, and when you file a lawsuit, it is the best example of trying to take some control back, right?
Right.
And so from an abuser perspective, I have a pie, and there's only a finite amount of power in this relationship, and I have most of it, and now you're trying to take some of my pie. And I feel threatened by that. I'm going to escalate the tools and strategies that I use to gain back my power and control. And so if, it's possible that maybe I could have made that difference for her in that case, but it's also possible that it would have escalated him even further.
Right.
Now she's got this, lawyer with a big mouth, doing her job and, running things. And, I try to be as kind as I can to opposing parties. There's probably some out there watching this that don't agree. But I try because I don't want to escalate someone that has that mindset, because I know the person that's going to pay the price for it is not me.
Right.
And it may not even be my client. It may be those kids.
Right.
Right. And so I try my best to reach agreements. I try to figure out a path forward where we're not in court hammering, hammering this person and humiliating them, because again, like, this type of person, like, they are going to escalate with that kind of interaction. Now, it doesn't work all the time. Sometimes you have to go to court and put the hammer down. But I think it's important, again, as lawyers, if you have clients that are talking about sexual violence and stalking and physical violence, to think about how to strategize around, making sure she or he gets the result that they want without escalating that person, or just being critical about thinking about that.
So we have a stalking protective order now, right?
Yes, that's right.
So I think that's an important resource for people to know about.
It's a big one. So in Texas, you can get a family violence protective order, and basically family violence, you have to prove either physical assault or imminent threat of physical assault, or sexual assault or imminent threat of sexual assault, right? And sexual assault, not sexual coercion, but sexual assault in the penal code, sexual assault, right? And so it's narrow. But we also have a sexual assault protective order that does cover, it's a little bit broader in terms of what sexual assault would include. And then we have the stalking protective order, which is a wonderful tool for people that may not have this sort of level of physical or sexual violence or evidence of it to establish it, but they can establish harassing and threatening, 40, 50, 60 text messages daily after the person has sent one. We all teach our clients, here's what you send. This is an unwelcome communication. I'm going to ask you to please stop. Any additional communication will be reported to the police as harassment, right? You do that, and then they keep coming at you, and then we can help our client go to the police and make a report, and maybe the police will, pursue it.
Right.
But then you connect that communication to other behaviors, showing up at my work, monitoring me on social media, some of these things that you might be able to piece together for a judge to prove stalking in that way, and then you can get a stalking protective order.
We also have that new stalking injunction. I think it took effect last year, right? The injunction they put in place where you can't monitor.
Oh, you mean in the standing orders?
Right.
Yeah. So they did. I think that's right. They updated the standing orders to include like some injunctive language around harassment is, tracking and monitoring, because also a big favor. We were talking about technology earlier. I mean, one of the things that's come up a lot. I don't want to give people any ideas, but these Apple AirTags, like. Come on, these guys or whoever are popping them on cars, and they're, they know where their victim is. I think I may have talked about this last time I was here because I had that. Maybe I did. I had that case where the guy had put an Apple AirTag on a client's car, and at the time, those Apple AirTags, they would only show up on an Apple phone. Like if you got in your car, it would like pop and go. There's an AirTag tracking you. They've since changed that, so Android's also, right?
Nice.
But at the time, it wasn't happening for my client. She had an Android, but she got a friend, got in her car. She had an Apple. She's like, "It says there's an AirTag."
Oh, wow.
And she knew that she was being stalked by her abuser, so she was like, "I know what this is." So she just pulled over in the town she was in and called the police. And they helped her locate it because they were like, usually they're, check your car, and she found it. It was like taped up. They usually like walk by and like tape it up in the wheel well, basically, like real quick. And so they found it, and the police took it as evidence. They were gonna, because it's a crime. It's a crime to do that. Now you can be prosecuted for that. And so they took it. But what tickles me and delights me is that the cop was going around still doing his job, and he had it in his car. And so he had gone to this bar to do something and then back to the police department. And so this guy starts blowing my client up. "What are you doing out at this bar? What are you doing at the Great Police tonight?"
Oh my gosh.
And I was like, "Oh, thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much." So that was scary, obviously scary for her, and I don't mean to make light of it, but when you do this kind of work, you have to find the moments of like celebration and delight in sort of the dumbassery of some of the behavior that is deterring.
Right.
So, yeah.
I think that's a legal term, dumbassery.
Yes, dumbassery. Yes. Oh, it is. It is, for sure.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all of this information. Every time you're on, I freaking learn so much. I love that you're training judges. I love that you're teaching us. I love that you are here to educate people, because there's so many resources and tools and things that people just don't know unless they hear from someone like you.
It's true, and those resources are out there, but let me say this. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and so take a look at dcfof.org, our website. Hopefully in the next couple days, they will have a list of all kinds of cool activities that will be happening in Denton County for Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And then I know you guys have a following in these other jurisdictions that you work in. Is it Midland and Odessa?
Yep.
So there's wonderful organizations, domestic violence programs in your community. Look for those. Almost every agency will have something going on for Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So, do something. Purple is the color. So wear some purple. Check your organization. Find something cool that's going on. I know we'll be participating in National Night Out on the 1st of October. And then we have a number of events happening with, at the end of the month, a conference that's our battering intervention program that lawyers are welcome to attend, and really the community if you wanted to attend. We're bringing an expert in by the name of David Mandel, and he's like really operates in the intersection of child welfare and domestic violence, but he has a new book out called Stop Blaming Mothers and Ignoring Fathers, when we're talking about domestic violence in the context of parenting. So we're having him in for a day-long conference that's really affordable. So check out our website under events to see about that.
Nice.
Very cool.
Great.
So, as we always say at the end of the podcast, this is not to be construed as legal advice, right? If you find yourself in a situation like this, it is so very important that you seek local counsel in whatever jurisdiction that you're in. Tell them your story, tell them your full story, especially if you have any of these situations that Ms. Bloom has discussed today. And then they will be the person that will tell you what to do and how to navigate it. Please make sure that you follow us on all social media apps, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook. If that's out there, we're probably on it. And
can I add just real quickly, if you are a victim and you need help and you don't know where to go, the National Domestic Violence Hotline, 1-800-799-SAFE. A wonderful resource that can tell you wherever you are, the closest place to get help.
Awesome.
You're so amazing.
Thank you. All right.